Like so many today, I begin reflecting on the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as we recognize not only his birthday, but the legacy he left behind. I'd like to begin by saying what so many people neglect is the fact that Martin Luther King was a preacher. He was just not a doctor, he was the Reverend Doctor. And while it's very common to leave those three letters off of his title and namesake, we must remind ourselves that it is because Martin was a Christian that he was able to lead the March on Washington and the legacy that he left behind. In fact, it was because of his duty to God and country that he allowed his life to be sacrificed for the cause of so many of us, not just people of color, but of all people in this country. I think that it is very evident that when one group of people in our nation suffers, the entire nation suffers. And I'd like to encourage each one of us to reflect on this simple truth that I would like to expound upon the speech I've just recently listened to in its entirety. Reverend Dr. King spoke about slavery as a night of darkness, and he insisted that because of segregation, because of Jim Crow, and because of discrimination, especially in the South, that the bonds of slavery were still plaguing people of color, citizens of color. And I think it's important that we just look at his word choice there. As a great orator, he would have thought very long and hard about the words he would use in this momentous speech, knowing that it would make history. By using the word night of slavery, he not only compared the darkness that many people suffered through economic disparages, he also limited it in the scope of those minds and hearts and ears that were listening to him that day. By painting the years of slavery as a single night, he illustrated the fact that, one, it was over legally. There was no slavery in America. And two, it was a definite amount of time that was limited by the efforts of many Americans of all color. Why so many of us still operate as if slavery were legal, as if slavery were going on today, we plague our own selves with this victim mentality. And it is that victim mentality that keeps many in bondage today. Those of you who know statistics know that there are more black millionaires than any other ethnic group. Obviously, slavery does not exist. Now, I do not deny the fact that there are disparages. However, many of those disparages come from lack of education. We need to afford ourselves of the rights that our Constitution provides, just like Dr. King spoke, and demand that paycheck of equal opportunity be made available to all citizens in this nation. That's one thing that was at the crux of his speech. Very few of us have actually listened to the full speech that he gave in front of the Washington Monument. He talked about the Emancipation Proclamation, and he talked about the fact that all men were created equal, given inalienable rights by their Creator. These are not words that Dr. King coined, but rather words that he repeated. These are the same words in our Constitution, the words that every single American needs to make themselves aware of. It's something that must be taught at the earliest ages so that we can understand that any bonds of slavery or discrimination are illegal in this country, and the people, our ancestors, both black and white, fought to make sure that that was the law of the land in this country. We're the only nation, to my knowledge, that has ever done such a thing, to make sure that justice based on appearance or ethnicity be done for all men, and that segregation, discrimination, and slavery be officially illegal in our nation. Men shed their blood for this, men of all colors. Men of all colors fought in the civil rights movement to make sure that those laws that had been established in our Constitution were enforced. But today, people do not want to stand for the flag that fought for their freedom. I have sore news for many folks. The white man could not survive in America without the assistance of Native Americans and African slaves. There's no way the white man could survive in Africa without the assistance of black Africans who kidnapped and sold their brothers and sisters into slavery. History shows us that the European ships that came to collect slaves were docked in the harbor, and they waited because in moments, in days, black Africans brought out those captive, those deemed less worthy in their communities, and sold them to the European traders that were coming through those lands and those waters in order to gain a profit. We know that white Europeans did not canvass the continent of Africa looking for people to be kidnapped and sold into slavery, but rather it was brothers that sold Africans into slavery and brought my ancestors and many of your ancestors to this country called America. While I regret the pain of slavery that my ancestors endured, I am thankful that they did endure, because now I am in the greatest country on the face of the earth. I know that the life I would have had I stayed in Africa would have been quite different. And while our imaginations can run wild, I know that if my ancestors were deemed the weakest link, kidnapped and sold, it is likely that we would have been enslaved in our own nation had those Europeans not come along. Years later, I reap the benefits of what my ancestors went through, and I remind myself of that not just in February, not just on Martin Luther King's birthday, but every day when I look in the mirror, I realize that I have an opportunity to capitalize on the suffering that they endured. The suffering that they endured not only at the hands of slave owners, but at the hands of their kinsmen who sold them into slavery in the first place. It's very easy to blame someone who looks different from us. It's very easy to blame who we see as the opposition, but unfortunately, history has proven that this was a joint effort, that Africans were enslaved in this country. However, if you're a descendant of slaves, I would urge you to celebrate the fact that not only did you endure, but you were reaping the benefits of it. And to use the Constitution to the fullest of its ability, so that if you are in economic bondage or any other quote-unquote slavery, that you can break free of it. Because there's one analogy that Dr. King used in his most famous speech, I Have a Dream. He talked about segregation and Jim Crow and discrimination as chains. Chains that can be broken. As we remember his legacy, as we celebrate his history, and even as my pastor is preaching at Ebenezer Baptist Church today, I am thankful for the joint legacy that we all share as American citizens and our obligation to make America, again, the greatest nation on the face of the earth. One last comparison I want to bring up. Dr. King said that in his March on Washington, he was there to cash a check that the Constitution provided for all people, but that America had bounced. In fact, he used the words bad check. Now, we don't use checks anymore, but we all get the analogy. When he stated that America had written a bad check to its citizens of color, it was referring to the fact that many past presidents allowed segregation to continue in the South, especially until the Voting Rights Act of 1964 and other civil rights legislation that was passed to enforce what is already in our Constitution. But I am very thankful as I listen to the speech this year to be touched by the notion that President Donald Trump has signed into law through executive order the Urban Revitalization Act. Dr. King, your check has finally been cashed. While many presidents say they are for the underdog, say they want to help people of color, say they want to undo wrongs for various special interest groups, it has only been President Trump who has signed a multi-million-dollar, up into the trillion-dollar piece of legislation that, while can't even really be called legislation because it was an executive order, will actually pay that check, that debt that Dr. King says America owes people of color. And I fully agree, and I'm thankful to be a part of the coalition that President Trump has authorized. I'm thankful to be a representative for the state of Georgia and want to announce to all those listening that if you have a project or a nonprofit organization that is benefiting people of color, citizens, other disenfranchised communities, to please message me or put your comments below this video as I am starting the process of vetting these proposals to share them with the President. I'm very thankful to be traveling to D.C. in February to be able to communicate with other people on this committee, other people who are committed to supporting the initiatives that President Trump is instituting on behalf of citizens. I'm thankful that even though Dr. King gave his speech 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, it's taken less than 100 years since his speech for a president to actually act upon those famous words he gave in front of the Washington Monument. I want to thank the entire King family for continuing his legacy and reminding people of the importance of equality as stated under our Constitution. We're all citizens, black and white, have the same inalienable rights given by their Creator. And while we choose not to infringe on each other's rights for the sake of creed, religion, language, or color, we remind ourselves that this principle is divinely orchestrated. This country was founded on religious freedom, and it is that religious freedom, it is that freedom established in the Constitution of the United States that has given President Trump the opportunity to sign this executive order, releasing funds into opportunity districts that are going to benefit not just people of color, but all people in those communities. As I said before and will say again, when my neighbor wins, I win also. Because now I have a neighbor who is going to respect property, who's going to contribute to society, be a taxpayer, and help lower my crime by being part of a neighborhood watch organization. When our communities are attacked, when our communities are weakened, when our communities are disenfranchised, it does affect the entire state. And we must work together in order to make sure that these funds that have been appropriated for urban communities who have been disenfranchised over the years benefit the state as a whole. And as those states benefit and become stronger, our nation becomes stronger. Congratulations, Dr. King, on your legacy, and congratulations, President Trump, on this executive order for urban revitalization. Dr. King's bad check has finally been made good. Have a great Monday.